Hey, and welcome to the Clinch, where we can count ourselves lucky here in South Africa that satellite TV subscribers didn't have to pay anything extra to watch the Mayweather-McGregor fight, courtesy of Supersport. Now, there's almost been as much fallout from the fight as the build-up. Now, I said almost, but here to help me make sense of Maymac is the head of communications from Supersport, Clinton van der Berg. Clinton, thanks for coming in. You're a big boxing fan. What did you make of the fight?
I loved it. I loved the whole promotion. Of course, it percolated for months before, and the excitement built. And what helped it to a great degree was the characters involved. So the energy levels were high, the hype was high, of course, and I guess the anticipation was high, and that was mainly on McGregor, who I think had some of us at least believing he stood a chance. And then, of course, the whole spectacle of the show itself. I loved it from beginning to end. I didn't take it terribly seriously, but it was a fun fight.
So you think boxing then has kind of, are we overstating the case where we say that boxing has kind of benefited from the hype that was generated around that fight? For example, when you're putting on Golovkin against Canelo in 2.5 weeks, do you expect the numbers to be increased for that fight as a result of the Maymac fight?
I think we would, because a lot of people, and not least of them, Oscar De La Hoya says, now for the real thing.
Yeah.
He didn't approve, of course, what went on in Las Vegas, and he's taking his guys there for this fight at the same venue. Listen, I think it's helped boxing, and what it's done is it's focused people's attention on it, and with luck, it's drawn in some fans.
Yeah, I know, like me, you're a combat sports fan in general, aren't you? But there was a lot of social media tours going on between MMA fans and boxing. What do you make of that?
I thought it was all a bit silly because people who follow it, like you and I do, there's room for both. Yeah. And people saw this as MMA versus boxing. It was nothing of the sort. What it was what they tapped into entertainment. They tapped into sport. We see it with WWE, of course, and other things like that. And they were very smart about it. And we know it worked because they made so much money. They made so much money because there was international interest. So those tours that went on, it was harmless fun, not to be taken seriously.
Yeah, I use the phrase "a rising tide raises all boats," and if you're a combat sports fan like us, you can't pick and choose which one is so close to your heart. Can I ask you a cheeky question? Can you give me some kind of indication of how much Supersport paid for the rights for that fight?
A lot. But the truth is, I don't know how much we paid for it. Our acquisitions team handle it, and it's something, typically rights fees, Supersport keeps very close to its chest. But my understanding was that we paid significantly more than we would for regular fights. Say, for instance, the Triple G Canelo fight. Yeah. And I think that's mainly because it was denoted to be an event rather than a regular fight, and that's the reason why. And also remember, you're paying in dollars, so whatever it is in rands, it's a lot of rands.
So can you give me any kind of indication of, do you believe it was worthwhile? Have you had any figures coming in from the fight for the South African viewing audience? Or do you think it was worth the bucks?
Well, like you, I was on Twitter early on Sunday morning. There was an incredible buzz. I was out and about on Sunday running into people. It's all they were talking about. And you could only be talking about it had you been watching it. The figures haven't come in, although we've got figures for DSTV now have come in 30 times higher than anything they've ever done before. So the ratings haven't come in yet, but DSTV now, that's watching via the app, stratospheric. So those indications are very positive.
30 times any other combat sports or boxing, or 30 times anything?
Anything.
Any sports event ever in the history of Supersport on your digital streaming?
Oh, that's right, that's right.
Well, that's 30 times more. That's absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it is. It's enormous. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So it just shows you the interest was enormous. But also, of course, that's increasingly how people are watching television. Yeah.
I know you're a big boxing fan and a very, very well-seasoned sports journalist. What's the future of boxing and combat sports in general on Supersport? Can you give me some kind of indication? Do you think that this may encourage some of the senior management and commissioners at Supersport to actually invest a bit more in combat sports in general, or is it kind of a stasis?
That's a good question. For us, the fights don't typically rate as well as your major things like rugby, cricket, or soccer. So, and boxing has to stand on its own. It's got to prove itself, those kind of things. However, when you have the big fights, they do obviously do well. We had, of course, we had Mayweather, Pac-Man 2 years ago, which did very, very well for Supersport. And the thing is, what we want to do is be a little bit more discerning about what we offer. Like, there's lots of boxing out there, but what we want to do is get the best of it. And of course, there's budget constraints, things like that, but we are committed to boxing. It's a staple of pay television. It always has been. And combat sport as well. Increasingly, we're looking around, seeing what's out there, because there's an entire universe of people out there who have an incredible interest in this, and they're very vocal, and they tell us they want more.
Yeah, I'm a big MMA fan, but I'm also love my kickboxing, my glory, my Muay Thai. Is MMA on the horizon of Supersport? Is it something that you guys often discuss there?
It does come up for discussion. We talk about it, and what I can say is watch the space. I can't say more.
Oh, wow. How long do I have to watch that space for, Clinton van der Berg?
Probably a little longer than you'd like. I'd say around about 6 months.
Okay.
But we should have some good news. But often, guys pitch their ideas at us, so there might be one-offs between now and then. No question, we never discount that. It is a sport Supersport is interested in.
Yeah. So how does boxing do? You say it has to stand on its own. How does it compare to the other, usually on a 7-day rotation? How does it stand up on its own compared to, say, golf, for example? Well, obviously, it can't compare to the big soccer games or the big rugby or the big Proteas International, for example. But how does it do compared to some of the lower marquee sports codes?
Well, it's not a fair comparison, and I'll tell you why. Yeah. Because often the boxing, if you imagine the Premier boxing, so the stuff that comes out of Vegas or London, those kind of big fights, we put them on our Premier package. So it's not available to all subscribers. A compact, which is the lower tier, of course. So by extension, you're going to get fewer viewers. But then a lot of the local stuff, for instance, does get down in compact, and it does very nicely. Last year there was a local fight at Empress Palace that did great numbers. So when you get the right matchups, they do resonate. And I'd say boxing is probably on a par with regular golf. So I'm excluding the majors, which are a little bit different. And of course, remember golf and boxing, there's an interesting parallel is when you have it in the US, which is typically around about 4 or 5 Sunday morning. A lot of it, the hours just don't suit the viewers. So your numbers aren't as good as they could or should be. However, when we have repeats, that's often when you accumulate better viewership.
So congrats on the WWE campaign. I'm very excited for that because I used to work for them back in the day on Sky. But also I'm so excited that you're going to see Raw and SmackDown live and uncut. And don't just calm down. I'm not equating it to fighting or to boxing. I know it's pure entertainment. How's it going with Supersport? Are you happy with how WWE is performing? It's a great win.
I tell you what, it's early days. We went live for the first time this week. But incredibly, we had a lot of engagement on social media at 2 in the morning.
Wow.
So guys across the continent got up, dedicated, loyal, and they were thrilled. They see it for what it is, which is just terrific entertainment. And of course, it's very well packaged, as you well know. The production values are incredibly high.
Amazing,
early indications are very promising. And as you say, we've got those 2 properties live. In addition, we're going to have the payper-view stuff, which of course will be
WrestleMania, SummerSlam live.
All that stuff.
Wow. Yeah, that's fantastic.
So I know they have 15 events a year, pay-per-view events. So there's one coming up late September, November. In fact, they're in Houston. Hopefully, the waters have receded. But yeah, there's a lot coming down the pipe.
That's amazing. South Africa is a sporting mad nation. It must be very difficult keeping everyone happy with all the sports fans. And I know it takes a lot of your time as head of communications. Do you enjoy your job? Is it difficult?
I love it very much, I must say. And just to be in that sports environment is first prize. Some days it doesn't feel like work. Of course, some days it does. It is difficult to get a balance with, and strangely enough, it's a lot of the smaller sports. So while they might be in the minority in terms of viewership, they're very vocal. So get it wrong or don't broadcast something and you hear about it pretty quickly. But in the main, people are grateful and they realize there's value there. And as the guys traveled, you would realize how difficult it is and how expensive it is to watch sport overseas. And that's a reality, and we try our best to give good value.
Talking about the expense of sport then, Clinton, what's the future of Supersport? What have you got coming up that really excites you? And is it really tricky in this current environment buying major assets like international boxing events?
It's tricky, and I'll tell you why, because increasingly there's competition. So whereas maybe 20 years ago we used to be the only game in town, there's now competition, particularly on the continent. So there's a lot of cash, and sometimes it's excessive. However, our philosophy is we'll always pay a fair price. But when it gets to crazy money, we'd probably rather walk away. But we're always mindful we need to deliver the big stuff. Call it the crown jewels. So you've got stuff like Premiership football. That's key. You've got stuff like PSL, of course, the international cricket with the tier 1 nations. We like to bring those. And I think the future is predicated on having their major events. So the things like World Cups remain critical. For us, the challenge is offering them on multi-platforms. Increasingly we're finding that that's how people want to consume it. And then you've got that other dimension. And in fact, I think MMA falls a little bit into that kind of left of center stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like the X Games that ESPN used to put on. There's some quite interesting things happening in that space. And you've seen we're broadcasting esport as well, which is very interesting. I know in Europe in particular does insane numbers. You've got Formula One teams back and you've got Premiership teams having esport teams. So that's a world we're looking at. And we've got a big launch in September around our property. So it's a fascinating space and will be for the next few years.
How do the viewing figures ratchet up then between your digital live streaming app and your DSTV subscriber base? What is the difference? Is digital catching up with traditional television consumption?
It certainly is catching up. It's interesting, for instance, on a Friday morning when guys are in the office and you've got Super Rugby on, so you'd have numbers spike. And that's typical. In the week, the ratings on Supersport are okay, but it's a weekend when you have the big action and then they spike. But streaming is becoming enormous. There's no question. So we often, we're doing refinements and what have you. And when we're promoting our sport, when we're promoting our broadcast, it's a very strong element of the promotion is where you can access it.
Well, the future is very bright for Supersport in the South African market. I really can't wait to see what you've got coming up, particularly in the MMA. We are certainly going to watch the space and be on your case with it. Last question, Clint. I'm going to push you on the Triple G Canelo prediction. It's not going the distance, this one, is it? What do you reckon?
I reckon it's going to be a classic like those fights in the 80s. You remember with Hagler, Hearns, Duran and Leonard. I think it's going to be a special fight. And the great thing is Triple G talks about fighting Mexican style. And of course in Canelo, he's got the ultimate Mexican style. We're in for a classic Triple G to win with a late stoppage.
Triple G to it, I completely agree with you. September the 16th to be on Supersport. Clinton Berg, Head of Comms, thank you so much for coming in, mate.
My great pleasure. Thank you.